towards the end of the 45 years, I decided that sitting in a special seat with everybody looking at me, telling everybody what was important, and expressing my points of view on controversial matters was no longer interesting to me. As far as I was concerned, I was more interested by that stage in simply having a quiet life with time to sit by myself, to read, to learn, to study, and to look after the interests of the people who needed my support. So being important was no longer interesting to me, and there came a stage at which I even squirmed at the thought, this is going to be one more television interview. I had so many, and by telling you that I'm not boasting, I had so many of such interviews that, as I say, there came a stage at which I said, look, leave me alone, I want a nice quiet life, I want to be a mensch.
Okay, so you're talking about your public life. So this was beyond what a regular community rabbi will do. The position you filled for 45 years in Australia, you were more than just the rabbi of a very large shul. You were a communal figure or a representative of the Jewish community in Australia. What were the types of topics that they would call you into for for television interviews and newspaper interviews and radio interviews?
One of the big controversies in Australia in my time was whether the Queen of England should continue to be the Queen of Australia. The link between Australia and Britain had been continuing for many, many decades, and people thought that Australia should grow up and be independent and say, thank you, Your Majesty, thank you, Queen, it's now time for us to look after our own destiny. So this was being debated all over Australia. There came a point at which one of the television stations decided that they were going to take 20 leading Australians and ask them for a point of view. Should the Queen remain the Queen of Australia? So, a great compliment. I was one of the 20 leading Australians. One morning, the television cameras and the television staff landed in the great synagogue, Sydney, of which I was the rabbi, and they asked me, Rabbi, what do you think? Now, of course, at that point, I had to think not as an individual, because if I'm just talking about my own point of view, I would say I was a Republican, which means I wanted Australia to be itself, to be independent, and to live without the Queen. But I couldn't speak only for me. I was the public representative of the Jews of Australia. I had to think, what would all the Jews say? So I had to be very careful in the way I answered the question. I gave an answer, intending to be true to the Jewish community, but still to be able to put across my own point of view. I said, if Australia really matters to the Queen, she will have a house here. She will come to Australia several months a year. And the crucial thing that she will do is that when there is a cricket test, a cricket match between Australia and England, she will say, I am the Queen of Australia, I hope Australia will win. So that was one of the things which I found that I was able and required to do as a public representative of Judaism. This is not a question of, can I look up a Gemara and say, this is what the Chazal of the Talmud would have said. The Chazal of the Talmud wouldn't know what I was talking about. It's not a question of whether I could find something in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not a question of whether there were Sfarim in which the matter would be discussed and I could simply stand there and say, I looked up in such and such a sefer, I looked up this perek, and this is what the din is. That wasn't the point. What I was required to do was to be a diplomat, to be an ambassador, to say what needed to be said, but to say it in such a way that I wouldn't be making enemies. Let me now turn to another kind of situation altogether. Every now and then, within the Jewish community, there were groups who were disagreeing with each other. And one of the most common of these disputes was between Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews, between Orthodox Jews, Shomrei Mitzvot, and liberal Jews, for whom Judaism had to be made more modern. Now, I was proud of the fact that for all the years that I was in Australia, I think largely because of me, there were no big wars between Orthodox and liberal.
When you say liberal, you mean reform?
I mean reform.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that the language which I use here is the language which applied in Australia, not necessarily in the United States or anywhere else. There they have their own way of saying things. What did I do? I was on very good friendly terms with all the liberal, all the reform rabbis, to such an extent that when one of my daughters got married, I was told by a reform rabbi who was there as one of the guests, this was the nicest wedding I ever went to. Well, I didn't have any fights with them. I used to say amongst the Orthodox Rabbanim, if we don't agree with what they tell, what they tell their people, if we don't agree with what they teach, then we have to teach something even better than they do. And so the way that you fight this battle is not that you hit each other or you take guns and shoot each other. The way you fight is to say, there are many points of view. We believe that we are correct. We believe that the Judaism that we support is the authentic, the true, the proper, the historic, use whatever word you want to use, kind of Judaism. But the way to put it across to people was for people to say, you know, that Orthodox rabbi is talking sense. Now, my task, therefore, was to be a diplomat, was to be a leader, was to be a man of peace, but to try to achieve whatever could be achieved through peaceful methods and not by fighting.
Did you ever get yourself, did you ever find yourself in a situation where you were trying to be the person in the middle making peace and you ended up with everybody being annoyed with you?
Sometimes, yes. Very interesting. Some of the problems that arose in my community, like in any other community, had to do with kashrut. Now, every now and then we had a situation where a kosher butcher was doing something which was not in accordance with halakha. So I had to be the one that had to take away the hechsher, the license from that particular butcher, but I had to do it in such a way that the community would not hate me or kashrut. So sometimes I did it. I can tell you a story about one particular kosher or supposedly kosher butcher. One morning, I just walked into this butcher shop without telling him I was coming. I walked in and I saw something in the shop which should not be there. So what do? I shout, I scream, No. It was very difficult, but I knew what I had to do. So I said to him, I think that somebody needs to check all the things on that shelf in the shop. I'm going out for a walk because I need some fresh air. I will be back in 5 minutes. I'm going to have a look at that shelf in 5 minutes' time. In the meantime, they realized what I meant. So...
what was it?
What? It wasn't even so important. It doesn't matter what it was.
It wasn't meat, in other words.
What?
It was... You're talking about meat or...
No.
Oh, something else they were selling.
Yeah. So I came back, and whatever problem I saw had disappeared. Okay. But all sorts of other interesting things, sometimes very amusing, come to my mind. I haven't thought of them for many years. I think, for example, of a particular shul where there's a big machloket between the Rav and the Vad. So they all decided that I was going to sort it out. So one Sunday morning, the Rabbi and Mrs. Rabbi came to the house, and the Parnasim and the Gabaim came the same time, the same place. I listened to both sides. I then said to the Rabbi, have you ever been in my study, in my library? Have you ever looked at my books? He said, no. I said, I would like to take you and the Rebbetzin into my library. I would like you just to sit there for 5 minutes. I want to have a conversation with the Vad of the shul without you being there. He was not very happy at all, because he thought that I was going to listen to them and say to them, you're right, you should get rid of the Rabbi. But in the end he agreed. I could tell you privately who it was, but
Anyway.
I don't want it to be known. 5 minutes later I went into the study. I said to the Rabbi, well, please come back into the dining room. I've had a conversation. So they sat on the other side of the table, and I said, Rabbi, while you were not in the room, we had a conversation, and we have decided that you are going to resign from the shul, and the shul is going to pay you a certain amount of money. So everybody agreed. He asked me afterwards, how did you arrive at that amount of money? That's much more than I expected. I said, I needed to do this in your absence. I needed to be able to persuade them about what they should do. So it worked.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, the description, the descriptive words are ambassador, diplomat, mediator, much more than a typical rabbinic role of something which is pastoral work, perhaps being a posek of halacha, teaching Judaism. When you first thought about yourself as a rabbi, did you have any idea this would be your life? This is what it would involve? What picture did you have in your head when you were a man in your 20s and you decided not to go into law, but to go in the direction of the rabbinate?
Before I became 20, I was bar mitzvah.
Yeah, that usually works that way.
That's the way things work. Now, in the shul in which I was bar mitzvah, they had a rabbi who had been there for many, many years. It happened that he wasn't at my bar mitzvah, because in the meantime, chas v'shalom, his wife had died, and he went away on a trip in order to be able to get back to work and to resume his activity. That rabbi, who was not at my bar mitzvah, was really, in a sense, my role model. He wasn't a great Talmudist. I don't know how much Gemara he had learnt. I don't know about his ability in halacha. He was a member of the Melbourne Bet Din for more than 50 years. So I can't make any judgment as to what kind of learning he had. But I know that he was a public figure in Australia. Everybody knew that this was Rabbi so-and-so, to the extent to which once a week he would play golf, which is one of the sports that very few rabbis ever get involved in. He would play golf with the leading Christian ministers.
Sounds like a bad joke. The rabbi, the archbishop, and
I know.
the golf course.
I know. But because that rabbi was a public figure, I think there came a stage at which my thinking was, that's the sort of rabbi that I think I would like to be. I decided that I was going to study law because I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to be an Australian ambassador. But there then came a point at which I decided, I have gone to university, I have gained a degree in law, I could become a lawyer, but I think what I want to do is I want to learn, I want to teach, I want to be a rabbi. And I want to be a rabbi like that particular rabbi. That was the kind of British model of whom there were many, many others. You see, I was living in Australia, but when I went to England, which I did some years later, I found that there were rabbis like that in almost every city in England, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Liverpool, in Brighton, in Glasgow, and so on and so forth. There would be what in Yiddish they would call a shtotrov, the rabbinic ambassador of that particular town. Now, sometimes these rabbinic ambassadors were very important in the public life of the city. And I suppose that when I found that that was the kind of job in which I ended up in Sydney, Australia, it was because the important thing was to be the representative, the spokesman, and again I use the word ambassador, of the Jewish people and of Judaism. So being the spokesman meant very often speaking to the media, speaking to the newspapers, the radio stations, the television stations. So right up until the last moment before my retirement, I was doing that. They would get on the telephone and they would want something. And the they was not always the newspapers and the television stations. Sometimes it was the leaders of the nation. The Chief Justice of Australia was about to dedicate a new High Court building in Canberra, the Australian capital. He wanted a sentence from the Bible to put outside the door of the new High Court. Rabbi, can you think of a sentence in the Bible? That was his question.
And what did you come up with?
V'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. Now, of course I didn't tell him in Hebrew, because it wouldn't have helped, but I told him in English. Then, you know, all sorts of interesting things.
And is it on the outside of the High Court building?
Well, he said he was going to put it there. I never went and had a look.
Oh.
And then every now and then other things would crop up. Every now and then there would be a member of Parliament who would contact me, and he was about to give a speech. Sometimes they were Jewish members of Parliament, sometimes they were not. They would want a pasuk from here, they want a Ma'amar Chazal from there. They didn't know from where I got whatever answers I gave. But it made me happy, and every now and then I would read what is called Hansard, which is the printed record of what was said in Parliament, and I would discover that there would be a parliamentary figure who would give a speech and he'd be quoting the rabbi. Well, a very great compliment. So this is the sort of job which is, I think, very important for the Jewish people in a majority non-Jewish society. It's very important even for the Jews themselves that they should know that in their Torah there are things which have to do with law, with science, with art, with literature, with medicine, and that they were able to feel it's good to be a Jew. So maybe this is one of the things which I did for the Jewish community, making Jews feel it's good to be a Jew.
Well, that's a major achievement. Aside from the impact you had on the greater non-Jewish majority of Australia, you served not just your specific shul community, but you served as a positive role model, something like the rabbi that you had growing up, how he was for you. You did that for the entire country of Australia.
Well, I tried to do it, and there came a stage at which, and again, I haven't thought of these things for many, many years. The Queen's representative in Australia is the Governor-General. The Governor-General is usually a very experienced soldier or member of parliament or scientist or something. I mean, in a sense, like the President of Israel, but the presidents of Israel are probably much more intellectual than the Governors General of Australia. Came a stage at which there was a discussion about who would be the next Governor General. And so one of the newspapers in Sydney wrote in one of its columns, maybe the Prime Minister should nominate Rabbi Apple to be the Governor General. Rabbi Apple grinned and laughed at the whole thing and said, but the government couldn't afford all the mezuzot for Government House. So,
would you have liked the position?
To tell you the truth, in those days I was already beginning not to feel that I needed to be important. But when I thought about it from the practical point of view, I realized it was a very great compliment, but it would be a very difficult job. How could one be a Shomer Shabbat and be Governor General? You have to travel, you have to be all over the place, and you can't say, this is Saturday, that is my Sabbath. Then there would come the problem of what to eat. The Governor General has to go to all sorts of public dinners. Can I say to them, let me get a kosher meal, because I can't eat the meal that they're going to be serving? So it would have been very, very difficult. So I never became Governor General, and these days I laugh about the whole thing.
Okay, but it was a very nice compliment that coming from the non-Jewish public, that they would have been happy to have you as the Queen's representative in Australia. Talking about the being important, when you're talking about what drove you to be this rabbinic ambassador, to be the public figure, were you driven by a need to feel important, a need to give, a need to feel you're making a difference? In what way was when you use the word important, what was important about the importance for you?
It's a very good question. I don't think that I ever involved myself in any particular job in the rabbinate in order to be able to boast and say, I'm a great man. I think what moved me was the feeling maybe there is some special chelik in public leadership which is waiting for me. I had a meeting soon after coming to Sydney. I had a meeting with the heads of the Great Synagogue, and we discussed my job. And I said, the way I understand it, my job is two jobs. One is to be the Rav of a community, the other is to be the Jewish representative to the country. I can do both. Which one do you want? The answer they gave was simple. There are two jobs, we want both. So, in a sense, I had to try to do both jobs for many years. One job, that special chelik, to make the shul a special shul, and to conduct the affairs of the synagogue and the congregation with some special quality of leadership, and at the same time to be the representative to the non-Jews. So, did I do the two jobs successfully? I don't know. There's only one answer that can be given. That answer is to be given by the Rabbanu Shalom when the time comes. If I live to 120, then he will decide then. Otherwise, he will decide a bit earlier. And
it's interesting because you described the idea that you had two jobs, but to the best of my recollection, you had at least 4, if not 5. You were a Jewish chaplain in the Australian Defence Forces. You lectured at the universities, 1 or 2 universities, I think. You had your own shul, you had the Beth Din, and then you had the ambassador or representative of the Jewish community. That's at least 5, and if I think a bit harder, I'll come up with more. In later years, you had your Oz Torah column that was syndicated all around the world. You were writing books. So you weren't just... I have no idea how you managed to get everything done in the course of a day. But you didn't just stop at being the rabbi of the Great Synagogue and, going on TV when they called you. You served the community in any way you possibly could. That's what it seems like, in many different genres. Did you feel sometimes that there were not enough hours in the day to do everything you wanted to do?
that feeling was a regular daily feeling. And one of the interesting things was that sometimes I never remembered whether I'd stopped to have a meal or not. There are times when I would come to dinner time in the evening and I'd say, did I have any lunch today? And I wasn't always certain. There are times when I would go to shul first thing in the morning, and I would stay in the office and put on the kettle and make a cup of tea. I would go out to lecture somewhere. In the afternoon it would very often happen that I would say to the girls in the office, well, I've got a special job to do today because can I talk about one of our grandchildren? I'll talk about just the one who was born in Australia. His mother was finishing a science degree at Sydney University. So every Wednesday, I think it was, she would come to the Great Synagogue on the way to the university and leave the baby with me because she needed to be able to concentrate.
So that's job number 6, babysitter. Okay.
Yeah. So what would happen would be that she would bring the baby, and if the baby needed its diaper changed, the baby would be put on the floor in the office, and all the girls in the office would come and help me change the baby's diaper. That baby is today 18 years old and is so tall that when I look up to him, he's huge compared to little me. So sometimes I never remembered all the things I had to do that day. I had a Gemara Shir I think it was every Monday night in the Jewish district of Bondi. And sometimes on the way there I had to go somewhere else in order to go to visit somebody who was Chas v'Shalom sitting Shiva. And so I would never know in the course of the afternoon whether I would go to the Shiva house or go to the Gemara Shir first. I'd get all mixed up. And one of the people who would come to the Gemara Shir would come every week. He would never leave it out, but he didn't enjoy the Gemara Shir. And every now and then would come to something in the Gemara, and you could hear that he didn't approve of what the Gemara said. He'd say, ah. And I would say, you know what? Our job is not to judge the Gemara. Our job is to listen to it. So there we are. So all sorts of interesting things. You say 5 or 6 jobs. Well,
I'm sure there are more that I've forgotten about.
I sometimes ask myself, why didn't they pay me 5 or 6 salaries?
Because you didn't ask for it.
Yes, I know. Shlemiel. Anyhow. But did I enjoy being a community rabbi? Sometimes no. Sometimes I would say, I've had enough of the shul. I'm going to take the shul and all the people and the community and throw them in Sydney Harbour, and I'm going to go back to the law. And then the lawyers would say to me, no, you stay where you are because you're doing a better job as a rabbi. So, I don't know. There came a stage that I decided it was time to retire. This is also an interesting story. You see, in Australia in those days, the retirement age was 65. I had no contract with the shul. There was never any agreement as to whether I would go, whether I would stay, and when I would retire. I used to say, I will know when the time has come. So I knew when the time had come. I came home to my wife and family one night and I said, I'm going to call the president and tell him I've had enough. I'm giving him notice I'm retiring. So it happened to be the night before Erev Rosh Hashanah. The president said to me when I called him, look, don't say anything on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And straight after Yom Kippur, we will have a meeting. So, in the end, I stayed another 15 months, just over a year, and because in the meantime they had to find somebody else. What we intended to do when I retired was to spend half the year in Australia and half the year in Israel. It didn't work. And one of the interesting things is why. I was sitting in Yerushalayim, in this room where we are at the moment, in my study, and there was a certain sefer I wanted. I wanted Chelik Beit, and I couldn't find it. Then I suddenly remembered, Chelik Beit is in Sydney. I had Chelik Aleph in Yerushalayim, Chelik Beit in Sydney. I got mixed up. So I said, I can't live like this. I have to have one home. So,
not to mention the flying to and from Australia and Israel.
That's terrible. We did that for so many years, and one of the worst things was to know that our children and grandchildren were growing up in Israel, and if we saw them once a year, that was already a lot. When we would come to Eretz Israel from Australia, sometimes we'd see a new baby, and each time we came the new baby had grown a little bit older, and we would say to that baby, I am Saba, look, this is softer. And if those children had understood what was going on, they would say, tell us another joke.
Oh, yeah,
Right? But I mean, it's not always easy when your children have babies and you're not there to help. But it works the other way too, because you feel you want to see your grandchildren. We didn't, and so eventually we had no choice. We made the decision that we would come to live in Eretz Yisrael. We would become Olim, and the way we did it was that we landed at Ben Gurion at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we immediately became Olim. But we had an appointment with a Pekida at the Misrad HaKlita. So we had an appointment to see her at 9:30 one morning because we needed Taudat Zehut and so on and so forth. And she had had a bad night. And when we came into her office, she shouted. She wanted proof that we are Jewish. So I decided I'm speaking English because in English I am in charge. If I tried to speak in bad Hebrew, then she's the boss. So I said to her, you know what? For 30 or more years, I was the rabbi in Australia who gave to Dot Yahadut to various people. People wanted to make Aliyah. I gave them the certificate to say that they are Jewish. So if I'm not Jewish, they aren't Jewish either. And there's a very big problem. So in the end...
And what did you say to that?
Not interested. I told you she had had a bad night. So in the end, what happened was, she said, well, all right, where do you want the Taudat Zehut? Shall I send it to you by post? Or do you want to come back and collect it? And we said to ourselves, we never want to see this woman again. So we said, send it by post. Oy vey. So there we are. Now, can I just tell you one or two funny things, because, yeah, if as I think that Rabbanu Shel Olam is going to laugh at me, and it says in Sefer Tehillim that God laughs, so he has a sense of humor. Funny things happened all the time when very often I was Masader Kiddushin, and very often, L'havdil, I was conducting Levayot. So it happened with one particular wedding that the bride came in wearing a bridal dress which was definitely not tzniut. So I said to this bride, I'm sorry, I can't allow you to come under the chuppah like that, because this is a very important and sacred occasion. And Baruch Hashem, the Chatan's mother had a few lace handkerchiefs, so she took the lace handkerchiefs and she put them in various parts of the dress. But that bride who's now been married, I suppose, 25 years, has never forgiven me. She still hates me.
No.
Okay. I can tell you a story. The Sydney Chevra Kadisha used to ask me Shelot. And on one particular occasion, they said, there is somebody whom we have getting ready to be buried. He was a smoker. He said he wanted his pipe to go in the Aron with him. Not like in Yerushalayim where they don't use Aronot. So, can we put the pipe in the Aron? I thought Meshuggah, but I could not find any halacha against it. So, it happened that I wasn't conducting that particular funeral, but I arrived at the Bet HaKvarot when that funeral was due to take place. So I said to the people from the Chevra Kadisha, can you just check that there is a pipe in there? That way I'll know that they've got the right body.
Hi.
In the same way in which these days I can laugh at myself, I think the Rabboni Shalom might also have a good laugh about me and say, you know something, you had some fun being a rabbi. I had some fun watching you.